When it comes to my presentation and my research, it comes with the, shall we say, less than salubrious title of infelicitous coordination, the significance of Knobe and side effects for Kleros arbitration. I'll unpack this as we go along, as well as those who have the handout. I'll talk a little bit towards that, but I'll primarily talk through what's going on in terms of this, shall we say, very ungainly title. In terms of my background, I got my PhD from the University of Buffalo. I'm at the ABD stage. And again, I'm interested in sort of the intersection of political philosophy, experimental philosophy, what's called XPhi, and epistemology. I applied for the sixth batch of the Kleros Research Fellowship of Justice, and in part it was because I saw that there was a potential application of this intersection to Kleros and to generally to justice systems. And I was new to Web3 at that point, but thought that my research would be significant for Kleros. And also, as a note, many of the ideas that are here in the presentation are going to be reflective of Kleros at the point in which I was working, which ended, the research ended in 2023. So if there are any questions about updates, I might be able to field some of those. But when it comes to the research goals, my thesis for this particular presentation and the methods, I'm going to be very interested in what is called the side effect for Kleros. And again, it's going to be first focused on the question of intentions and predications of intentions. But eventually, the consideration that we have about intention starts getting expanded. We are interested in predications of knowledge, desire, responsibility, if, as is suggested here, and as I will mention further, if the secondary effects are negative. And there's a weird sort of asynchronous sort of experience when we have individuals predicating knowledge, desire, blameworthiness, responsibility, intention, based upon whether or not the effect is positive or negative. And again, this is a worry because earlier, or very early on in this literature, there's a mention, and I will go over that quote, about that cognitive bias impacting jurors and judges. And as an aside, I would have a tendency to say that this set of research is really looking into a kind of bias, a kind of cognitive bias that fits in nicely with the heuristics and bias literature that's already available in psychology. There are some benefits to this particular set of research that I'll mention as we go along. My general thesis is Kleros may actually be immune. But there is significant worries about the side effect impacting Kleros jurors based upon consistent replication. That note about consistent replication is something that the experimental philosophy community is very good at. And this seems to be something that impacts a wide variety of people, wide variety of different language groups, ethnic groups, etc. And then ultimately, I suggested a mixed method study based around having juries adjudicate standard vignettes. I'll talk more about that. And also looking at other parts of the study, reviewing previous cases to see if something like the side effect impacted judgments. And ultimately, I created a survey to test jurors by filling out a questionnaire with relevant vignettes to see if they're prone to the effect. Again, I'll talk a little bit more why I think that was important and relate that back to particular considerations within the research as I proceed. But First and foremost, what is the Knobe effect? And the Knobe effect is named after Joshua Knobe, a philosopher at Yale. And Knobe literally went around first to a park, and he went and asked people a bunch of questions because he was interested in predications of intentionality. And so he would go around giving out versions of this vignette. The chairman of a company went to the chairman of the board and said, "We're thinking about starting a new program. It will help increase products, but it will either help or harm the environment." The chairman of the board answered, "I don't care at all about helping or harming the environment. I just want to make as much profit as I can. Let's start the new program." They started a new program. Sure enough, the environment was helped/harmed. So what Knobe eventually did was break essentially this vignette up into two parts. One where there was a consistent point about harm, the other one about consistently about helping. The note that the chairman receives that, hey, it could help the environment, and then the chairman saying, "I don't care about helping the environment," and then finally the environment actually being helped. The opposite would be for harm. And so we end up giving this to a number of individuals, and we have a weird result. Individuals predicate more intentionality when results are harmful than helpful. And this is going to be slightly odd because we know the chairman didn't intend to help or harm. We have explicitly the chairman saying, "I don't care about helping or harming." But individuals who are being given this survey consistently predicate more intentionality when results were harmful than helpful. Now, you might think, okay, that might just be some sort of weird effect that impacts intentionality. But we end up getting further consideration in the next consideration and application of this particular vignette. It ends up being slightly different than the chairman case. There were a number of other cases, number of other vignettes that were given just in case the vignette was triggering some sort of consideration that fixated on effects. But we can think about this particular effect in terms of the same vignette, but we end up thinking about knowledge predications. So the chairman of the board, instead of being asked how much did the chairman intend for there to be help or harm, well, we asked whether or not the chairman knew there would be help or harm. And it seems like we have the same problems before. It seems like the chairman doesn't necessarily know whether or not there would be greater or less harm or help. But we go back to our individuals, look at the surveys, and individuals predicate knowledge when results were harmful rather than helpful. Again, a very weird result because we don't have any actual sense of what the chairman knows based upon the vignette. All we know is whether or not there was a change in terms of help or harm. Now, experimental philosophers, individuals who are very much interested in considering the empirical applications and entailments of particular theories, particularly philosophical theories, this is into language, politics, epistemology, end up applying a number of different considerations here. We start to ask individuals whether they would predicate more or less motivational states like desire or moral considerations like blameworthiness or responsibility based upon harmful or helpful results. And sure enough, we end up seeing a consistent impact of harm ending up making individuals think and predicate that the individual who was responsible for or could be associated with the help or harm, they end up being, once they are harming the environment in this case, or in other cases, they end up being predicated with greater intentionality, knowledge, and blameworthiness and responsibility. And this whole set of biases, it ends up being coined the side effect effect. So, what is its significance for Kleros? Well, the significance for Kleros is going to be, on consideration, fairly important, because jurors would seemingly be considering judgments based on bias, not reasons. So if we have two individuals, and if we have an individual who may be in association with a result that is negative, we have a tendency to see them as being more knowledgeable, intending, desiring, etc., for that result to happen. And again, this would seem to be especially damaging for individuals who are trying to defend themselves in a particular jury scenario. One of the things I'm going to emphasize, and one of the things that has already been noted in a number of Kleros white papers, is that juries are epistemic engines incentivized to coordinate on truth. Again, this is something I really think is significant, because we're not just simply trying to get to the truth, we are incentivizing through coordination to get to the truth. And I talk about the epistemic significance of coordination in a few moments. But there seems to be a problem of what I'm going to call infelicitous coordination, an action that is inappropriately executed in the relevant context. So, what is exactly infelicitous coordination? Why does it matter in this case? Well, we can go all the way back to some standard cases in the game theory literature to think about coordination. So traditionally, coordination is seen as being independent of felicity conditions. And what are felicity conditions? Well, the idea is that in the prisoner's dilemma case, A and B can be silent, they can confess, but they are not incorrectly executing their decisions if either confesses. So this goes back to Speech Act theory and the idea that for a particular speech act to be enacted, there are certain conditions that are going to be required. For example, in a marriage ceremony, we need to have the right individual who can provide and can enact the particular wedding ceremony, such that if we had someone who was perhaps not a minister or was not a justice of the peace, two people could stand in front of a person and say the vows and seemingly be married, but the problem is we don't necessarily have the right situation happening. In terms of coordination, we would like to say that coordination is something that is going to be done in a particularly appropriate way. And this is something that's was at the fore of my thought at this point. And it is something that is a little bit difficult to consider. But infelicitous coordination would be akin in the prisoner's dilemma to the warden threatening each prisoner with death unless they confess. So the idea of coordination is we want the individuals who are coordinating to be able to make that choice of their own accord, to however much that can be done. In case of prison, there's going to be limitations on how much coordination can take place. But we would say that there's something fundamentally going wrong with the act of coordination itself if the warden has a gun to each person's head and saying, you both need to confess. There's something wrong in executing that decision because of the coercion. And similarly, Nadelhofer, who was one of the first individuals to start thinking about the application of the Knobe effect and eventually a side effect to juries, provides the sort of worry in this way. And he says, but if, on the other hand, the influence that moral considerations have on ascriptions of intentional action really amount to performance error, so the idea is that if we see harm and we say, oh, there's more intention being done, that's a performance error. There's no reason to think that there was more intention being done, at least as far as the criminal law is concerned. And if we have reason to doubt whether jurors can successfully avoid making the error, even if they're aware of it, then where does that leave us when it comes to intentionality and the other states that I've noted, epistemic states like knowledge, desire, responsibility, and the like to criminal law? It seems like we can have a sort of infelicitous coordination within juries if the same sort of bias, the side effect bias, is encouraging individuals to coordinate around points that are going to be mistaken because of a cognitive bias rather than independent consideration. So that's the worry that Nadelhofer presents and the general sort of worry I have for what I'm going to call infelicitous coordination. And again, I can talk a little bit more why coordination is important from an epistemic perspective if you have questions, because I think there's something really unique about the sort of coordination that goes into Kleros juries. And it's a feature that I think is very important. And I think it's a feature that, if it is threatened, would be a major drawback. Now, what was the study that I conceived of to try to help consider, the impact of the Knobe effect and the side effect on Kleros jurors, and how could we try to avoid the worries of Nadelhofer? Admittedly, Nadelhofer had done, or the research also was in the process of doing these particular studies and vignettes with jurors and judges independently, but not with juries in the act of deliberation. So one of the things is that we need to determine if Nadelhofer is correct, because no one has yet done an actual evaluation of juries to see whether or not they have these biases when they're actually impaneled and deliberating. Furthermore, Kleros may be already immune or could be immune. Why do I say that? The financial benefits that help fix some of the incentive structure may end up encouraging individuals to think differently. There are a number of different studies that suggest that when money is on the line, people tend to take a different perspective. Usually they tend to be a little bit more studious. So perhaps the Kleros model that utilizes financial incentives will assist. There could also be the integration of reinforcement in terms of say, explicit jury instructions and or information and training against the this sort of bias. Again, Nadelhofer thinks it's going to be the case no matter whether or not individuals are aware of it. there could be a particular set of training that could improve jurors and their abilities. Providing explicit instructions might help, and that's something else that is suggested in the literature. And there are also a number of triggers that might be associated with other sorts of biases. So again, something like the focal bias, the availability heuristic bias. There's also alternative syntax. So there could be a number of other biases and or methods that could be encouraging the side effect to impact jurors. But ultimately, the study that I had in mind had essentially two focuses. The first focus was just to see whether or not individuals who were jurors were more prone to the side effect through filling out a questionnaire that had the variety of studies that had been used across the literature on knowledge, intentions, desires, etc. So I think first and foremost, we look at our jurors and say, okay, if we have had jurors who've had to undergo considerations in jury pools, did that actually impact or perhaps make them more immune to the side effect? Maybe so, maybe no, but no one has actually done that study yet. And then finally, one of the other things that I was suggesting was to review previous jury cases for issues regarding infelicitous coordination and the side effect. I did not end up finding any. And during cases, especially the cases if we were able to impanel juries to test particular vignettes, looking at Discord and Telegram and other messaging services to see how much information that they might provide about how the jurors are thinking about those particular studies. When it came to the studies themselves, my thought was, okay, what we do is we have our classic vignettes, as you see on the left, and what we do is we slightly alter those, give them to a jury, flesh out all of the information related to that particular case, and essentially provide each vignette, and then have each jury work through those cases and see if, as in the classic vignette, if we have the harmed case actually giving us a sense that individuals were more intentionally harming a particular entity like the environment. This would have to, again, get refined, and there have to be a good deal of nuance in terms of making sure this was a vignette that could be brought to a standard that was appropriate for a jury. So we would need additional resources and the like. And again, one of the reasons why the study did not go forward is there would just be a lot of juries that would have to be impaneled to make sure that we covered, at the very least, even the intentionality and knowledge vignettes. So that was the particular study and worry that I had coming in with my concerns to the Fellowship of Justice and the research that I did. Again, I have appreciation for a number of the individuals who are on the call. Federico and William, were always giving me encouragement and direction. Jan and Abir were also helpful in terms of answering questions. And Jamila did a great job in terms of making sure that the research presentations on a monthly basis were focused and well thought through. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was amazing. I have lots of different questions, in particular in the context of lots of experiments we are starting to do about Kleros and AI as jurors and how they make decisions. I'm not going to ask you to answer now because it will take a long time, but we will definitely do like another call with you so we can like dig into these details. I mean, these effects, they affect AI jurors, they have biases, how this effect applies to them. Nobody has researched this for now. So like for now, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the game, and we will definitely have you back very soon here with us. Okay.
Definitely, and I'm more than happy to come back and to field any other questions, especially when it comes to AI. I think there are some perhaps unique questions there.
Thank you, Paul. See you very soon.